Hello everyone, welcome back to Paper Made Me Do It. In a recent video I posted where I had done some pen testing, trying to determine which notebook I was going to use to start a new bullet journal in the month of June. And so I ended up going with this B6 size Archer and Olive dot grid notebook. And I thought I would take a little time here now that we're basically 1 week into the month to show you how I set the book up, what I've done so far, and just kind of chat with you about some ideas for moving forward and what has and hasn't worked, and give you some tips along the way, because even though we're only 1 week into this month, I've already learned quite a lot. And this is my happy little book of mistakes, basically. So on the cover sheet at the very beginning, I just stamped my name, and I used the self-inking date stamp that I normally list in my journaling supplies, just to designate that this book started on June the 1st of 2020. And hopefully I will complete this book, and if so, I'll go back at the end and stamp the last date there. And one of the first tips I would give is if you do some pre-planning, and I did another recent video about that, just kind of thinking ahead of what I wanted to be in this book, and I took some messy notes in another notebook, but when it got time to actually start this book, instead of referring back to those notes, I made the mistake of saying, oh, I'll just go with what's in my mind. I don't need to refer to those notes because I'm not starting out with a ton of collections. This is, going to be very basic. So I know what I need to, do here. And you'll see in just a minute that the whole reason we write things down is so we will remember them. And there were a couple important things that I did not remember when I started setting this book up. But on the first page here, I just stamped out bullet journal and 01, kind of like a volume 01. And this is just a little translucent sticky note that I've temporarily put down here. I do at some point plan to do some type of drawing or decoration on this cover page, but I wasn't heavily inspired one way or the other as to which design to do here. So just decided to leave it simple for now, and I can always move back to it. And so when I flipped the page, I thought, okay, what do I need here? I know I need a key. So I started out with my Bujo key, and I listed all of the symbols that I plan to use. Most of them are in line with Ryder Carroll's original method, just a little bullet dot for a task, a circle for an event. I did use the triangle for an appointment, and he uses, I believe, the asterisk for a priority and a dash mark for a note. I also added a few little extras that I thought made sense to me, and that is a question mark for a question that I don't want to forget or something that I want to research later, a $ symbol for any financial notes or to-dos, a little doodle of a birthday gift for birthdays, a heart to signify anniversaries, a little dumbbell for a workout, and I wrote the letter B and circled it for buy. If I think of something that I need to buy right then, I thought if I don't have time to go online right that second, I could just do that, leave it in my dailies, and that way I won't forget to go back and buy that item. And so I used some Micron fine liners to do this little drawing of kind of an antique key. I did find an inspiration picture for this on Google Images, and the bulk of this is in line with the inspiration picture. I did make some minor tweaks in the body, and then when I got to the top of the key, I decided I'll just change this design up a bit to like make it my own instead of just copying the inspiration picture. And in hindsight, I actually prefer the look of the inspiration picture much more than this design. This feels a little awkward to me, but you know, whatever. It is what it is. I think the body is very pretty, and I love the way it's kind of faceted here. And so it looks really nice when you do a few different kind of shading techniques, some little cross hatching, and I put some little dots there. So even though I'm not a huge fan of this, overall, I'm happy with how that little doodle turned out. And then I decided to do a grid spacing page here because when I attempted to bullet journal around the same time last year, I stuck with more of the original bullet journaling method by Ryder Carroll, and I made an effort to keep everything simple, and I did basically no decoration in that book. It was all functional text and writing only. So at that time, I didn't have a need for this because everything was mostly just longhand text. But in this book, I decided that I'm not going to put any pressure on myself or obligate myself to make every single month or week highly decorative, or to, you know, the opposite, to make it minimalistic. I'm just going to kind of roll with the flow, and if things get busy and I don't have time to decorate, then I may do a more minimalist layout that week. But if I do have time to decorate in this book, I am going to allow myself to do that. And this grid spacing page can be very helpful if you do want to set up kind of a more decorative theme, because it helps you to at a glance know if I need to divide my page into fourths or eighths or thirds, whatever the case may be, half. You can just at a glance know, okay, I need to count down, you know, 16 rows to divide this page in half. So this book is a B6, which is kind of right in between A6 and A5 sizing. So I ended up with 22 columns and 32 available rows in this size book. An A5 book that is slightly larger, you would obviously have more columns and rows. Now, this was only 1, 2, 3 pages in, and I'm not sure if it's showing on camera or not. It probably is, but you'll see that 3 pages in, I made my first big boo-boo. And I kind of just laughed it off instead of being really upset about it. I thought it's kind of ironic that I'm only 3 pages in and I'm already making mistakes, when I had a vision of this book being like a perfect kind of, you know, Instagram worthy bullet journal. This experience honestly kind of humbled me and reminded me that mistakes are going to happen. They just are. So I had no liquid paper available, and because this book is bound in sewn signatures, it would really not be a good idea to try to remove any of these pages. So what I did was take a Uniball Signo white gel pen and just draw over this line that I actually miscounted and drew in the wrong place. So because this is my first decorative bullet journaling experience, I wasn't used to counting in this manner, and it seems like that would be so easy, but it does take a little getting used to if you're not used to it, in terms of whether you're counting like the actual line of the dots or the row in between that it represents. So somehow I, you know, counted off in my head the right number here, but as soon as I drew that line, which would have been to represent 1, 2, 3, like fourths. As soon as I drew the line, I looked at it and thought, that doesn't look right. That's not even. This column looks, you know, more narrow than the rest. And I realized that I had made a mistake in my counting. So in hindsight, I'm actually glad that my first mistake did happen early on, because it kind of, you know, freed me to feel like, okay, we've gotten that out of the way. Now let's just, you know, keep moving, and everything doesn't have to be perfect. But this style of grid spacing spread, I basically followed to the letter from a tutorial video here on YouTube by Plant-Based Bride. So I will try to link her video in the description if you're interested in checking that out. So I ended up labeling each row and column, as well as how to divide the page in half, vertically and horizontally. Then the little dotted line represents fourths, and then this little line with 3 dots represents a third of the page. Now, one thing that I learned particularly about this book is I followed her tutorial, like I say, to the letter. And so in some situations, like 32, when you're dividing into thirds, 32 is not going to equally divide by 3. You're going to end up with a fraction, either, you know, 1/3 of a row or 2/3 of a row, if you can see, like so. And that is how I initially set this up, is, you know, to the T. If something ended up being 10 and 2/3 rows, then I tried to divide a row by thirds and make the row not along the exact dots, but, you know, a third of the way off. What I'm going to be doing now moving forward in this book is kind of disregarding those fractions and just rounding up to the line, the exact dot line closest, either above or below, because, and I'll show you this, you'll be able to see what I mean here in another spread in just a second. But these thirds take into account the space between the actual printed dot grid. This book, this Archer and Olive book, beyond the printed dots, has a blank margin that runs on every edge. You can see that. There's a blank area on every margin that's about maybe 1/4 of an inch, give or take. And so because you have that additional space of margin, these little fractions don't even matter. If I were to drop that line up or down to the next closest grid, it's still going to look even on the page because of this kind of like forgiveness area of this blank margin. So moving forward, I'll know it's not worth being this detailed in the markings. I'll just go to the next line. So after that, I thought, okay, what do I need to do next? And I decided to go in with my future log. So the future log is one of the most important things if you're setting up a new bullet journal that you plan to use for actual planning. Because, you know, I started this book in June, so if I'm using this for planning, which I am, if I'm needing to schedule an appointment in October, well, you know, this book is blank after June. So having this future log allows you to schedule future appointments, events, things of that nature in advance, even though you don't have the calendars drawn out in your book yet. So there were a couple things, at least a couple things that I learned from this layout that I'll share with you. First of all, it's obviously very simple right now. I divided the page by thirds and just stamped out the month. And if you go back to Ryder Carroll's bullet journal method, this is pretty much how he sets up his future log, but he only writes the month, like, you know, July or 07, whatever. And for me, I'm a very visual person. So if I had only written, you know, October here, and in June, if someone asked me, can you go to this event on October 18th at 10 o'clock? Well, if I were to flip to my future log and just have the word October written here and not even be able to tell, you know, at a glance, October the 18th, is that a Tuesday? Is it a Sunday? Like, what day of the week is it? So I pretty well have to have the square calendar in my future log, just so I can tell at a glance if I'm scheduling something out what day of the week that is. Now, I also took my red ink and the Hobonichi ballpoint pen, because I hardly ever use that red ink, and just drew a little square over all of the like nationally recognized holidays like Independence Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, you know, Christmas and New Year's Eve, things like that. But in this spread, this should give you a visual of what I was talking about with the grid spacing. Since I divided these pages into thirds, that was uneven, and so I divided them like the exact number. So this was however many lines, 10 lines plus 2/3 of a line. You know, this is another third of a line. But to me, it looks uneven because when you take into account that extra blank margin, it almost looks like this middle section is thinner and the top and bottom sections are wider. So that's why in the future I'll just round up or down, because that margin space makes a difference. So that's why this middle section looks a little bit less wide than the top and bottom. It's because I didn't know to take into account that extra blank margin. Now, one other thing that I learned from moving forward, and I realize these are very tiny details, so if you don't get hung up on aesthetics, if you're not a perfectionist, you may be thinking, this chick is crazy, you know, she's being way too detailed. But I would prefer, if possible, for things to be evenly spaced aesthetically. So something else that I noticed, is not necessarily a mistake, but something that kind of throws off the evenness of the aesthetic. Whenever I went in to manually write the numbers for each of my square calendars, I went to each section and I started at the bottom. And then what happens is some months require an extra row if you have like one day that doesn't fit. So like these calendars only required 6 rows, but August and November required 7 rows because you've got this situation with one number here and one number here. Well, when you start your calendar from the bottom of each space, you end up with a variation here. So you've got quite a bit of space between the calendar and the monthly heading here, and then less space here, and it just looks kind of uneven. So moving forward, when I set this up in another book, what I would do, instead of starting from the bottom, I would list all of my monthly headers and then start this calendar from the top. That way you may end up with a little different spacing that's left over in each section at the bottom, but if there's more even space between your header and your calendar, I think it would be more aesthetically pleasing to start this from the top. Another comment I'm not sure that I made earlier about the key is I noticed after the fact that a lot of people do their key on the inside cover of their actual book. So that's another option that would be even quicker to find your key, is to do it on the inside cover. And so at this point, I thought, okay, so that's my key, my grid spacing, my future log. Do I just move right into the June monthly spread? You know, where do I go from here? And so I decided at that point to go pull the notebook where I had taken my messy notes. And when I looked at it then, the very first thing I had written down was index. Hello. So for bullet journaling 101, normally the very first thing you would do in your book would be to start your index. So I just, thought, here we go, like my little book of mistakes. So I just started a basic index. I haven't decorated it yet. And I decided, since I was already a few pages in, I decided not to backtrack and log these things because I just know where they are. I know that my key and my future log is at the very front of the book. So I decided to start my index with the planning for June. I allowed myself 3 blank pages, and I started numbering my pages with the first June spread as page number 1. So that's why I wrote June 1 through, and then once the month of June is completed here, I'll record the last page number in that index. So this is, kind of the basic setup for the entire book. So from this point forward, you're getting into the actual planning aspect of the Bujo, as well as you can start adding collections, anywhere in the book. So I had gone to the community tab here on YouTube and made a post and asked y'all if you had any suggestions for a monthly theme for the month of June. And one of my subscribers, thank you so much, I think her name was Karen, but I'll double check. She commented, why don't you do a bee theme to coordinate with the cover of your notebook? So I love that idea. I think bees are very cute. And I went to Google Images to start trying to find some inspiration photos. And I ended up coming across this image on Google. And it was very different than the traditional bee drawings. And I just thought it looked so cool. It was actually a Bible verse that someone designed. And I love this muted color palette also. But I decided to modify the design a bit to kind of make it my own. And for a color palette, I used 5 Zebra Mildliner brush pens. The green, blue, the gold, the gray, and the brown. And overall, I'm happy with how this turned out. If I could do it over, one thing I would do differently is I feel like I kind of overworked the outer edges of the little wings here. I feel like if I had made just one very thin line and not overworked that, then the wings would probably look a little more transparent. But overall, I'm happy with how it turned out. I think it's cute. It's a little different. And I used one of the Mildliner brush pens to write June. Used a fine liner to just do a little calendar here. And it felt like it still needed a little something. So I ended up drawing out some little geometric shapes here to kind of give the vibe of honeycomb. But if you can tell, they are metallic. The bee is not, but the little honeycombs are metallic. So I went in after the fact on that previous pen test and tested a pen that I found in my stash. It is a Craft Smart oil-based paint pen in gold. So it's a metallic paint pen. I tested it out, and just like everything else, there was 0 shadowing or bleed through. So I used that metallic paint pen to do the little honeycombs. So that's just kind of the cover page for June. And then I went straight into the monthly log. Now, I actually like how this turned out, but this was another mistake. Whenever I was stamping out the word monthly initially, I don't remember what happened now exactly, but the stamping just turned out very messy. I think there was a large part. I was trying to avoid when you stamp too hard and you get that really bold line. I was trying to avoid that, and I think I overcompensated and didn't press down nearly hard enough. And so the bulk of the middle of the word, I think that's what happened. Most of the word didn't stamp out. And I tried, you know how you get in there and you're looking underneath and try to reline up your stamps just so. So I tried to restamp it. But of course, Murphy's Law, it was not perfectly lined up and it made it look even worse. So I ended up taking a Post-it note in this kind of gold color that coordinated with the monthly colors, stamping onto it, cutting it out, and just gluing it on top of that mistake. And I'm not opposed to drawing out the block calendars with the monthly squares, and I may be doing some of those in the future. But for this month, starting out, I decided to do the original Ryder Carroll method of just listing the numbers of the days of the month and then the first day of the week beside each number. And it worked out perfectly to break this into 2 separate pages and give myself one blank line between each row. That was something that I learned when I did this for a couple months last year in a Leuchtturm. I didn't give myself this extra blank space, and when all of the numbers are just one right after the other, once you have several days consecutively, you know, filled out with something, and especially if you end up having maybe 2 or 3 things that you need to record on one day, I just felt like having it all on one page ended up looking very jumbled, and it was hard to find things at a glance. So I definitely like this, how this turned out. So that is a tip if you want your monthly log, if you decide to use this format. If you want it to not be too jumbled up and to be able to see things more easily at a glance, I highly recommend leaving an extra blank line between each day. So after I set this up, I took the fine tip end of the Zebra Mildliner brush pen and just went in and marked off the weekends. And that just goes back to me being a visual person. It kind of helps me at a glance to realize this is one week and the weekend. This is the next week and the weekend. And then after that, I took a fine liner and just went ahead and started adding the appointments that I knew about for the month of June. This was another doodle that I did that kind of coordinated with the title doodle. And I put one little honeycomb design there, and I feel like it looks a little awkward just having that one there. But I decided to leave it that way for now because I didn't want to draw a grouping of those here and then potentially end up needing to write in 2 or 3 tasks here and not have the room. So for the sake of function, I decided to leave this open for now, just in case I need this space. And then after these dates go by, if there's enough blank room still here, I'll go back and add another little grouping, maybe 3 of these little designs, just to kind of even out that little doodle. And so after the monthly log, I did a monthly task sheet and just started listing things that didn't necessarily need to be done any certain day or even the first week of the month, but things that I definitely need to get done in June. And this is something that's probably going to change that actually surprises me. So I assumed that since I'm so used to planning in Hobonichi weeks, that I would have to have this weekly at a glance page. And in the traditional bullet journal method with Ryder Carroll, he doesn't do weeklies. He has a monthly log each month, and then he goes directly into dailies. And he only has a monthly task list, monthly log, monthly task, and then directly into dailies. I was initially thinking I would do a weekly page every week of the month. But in hindsight, I honestly didn't refer to this very much during the week at all. And it didn't make that big of a difference. It would have been just as easy to look at this. So I may or may not, you know, when I was looking ahead, I had a couple appointments for this upcoming week, but they've been canceled. So as of now, I don't even have any appointments for next week. So I don't really see the point in doing another week of next week and it's starting out blank. I think I'm going to eliminate this for now. We'll see. And then after that, I did a weekly task. And so this is like to-dos that I knew I wanted done in the first week of the month, but not necessarily on a certain day. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing that in the future. I'm almost thinking that a monthly task list will be enough and just allow myself 2 pages for it instead of 1. So we'll see. I'm surprised that I thought this was definitely the structure I needed, but I feel like having the separate monthly and weekly is almost more of a distraction than a help. And so I did a little decoration here with the same metallic pen, and then these stickers, these are not doodles, these are stickers that I use that came from a previous monthly subscription, Sticky Club. So I remembered having them and thought that coordinated perfectly. So I'm going to use some more of those in the next few weeks. And another thing moving forward that I think I will do is a monthly habit tracker before I start my dailies, like for the month of July. I thought about doing that here, but initially I wasn't sure how to do it because at the time I didn't want to take the time to draw out the separate numbered square calendars for each habit. And when I went back to my grid tracker or grid spacing, I realized that I only had 32 rows. So with there being 30 days in the month of June, that would only leave me like 2 little spaces here to write, you know, what the habit actually was. If you were going to do that where you know, write the habit and then number your entire month and then just mark each habit off on the page. What I ended up doing is adding a little mini weekly tracker here, and instead of using each individual square like for one day of the week, I ended up using my Hobonichi green stencil that has this little row of 7 squares that are smaller than these open grids. And so I actually really like how that turned out, and I have been referring back to it during the week. So I think I'm going to keep doing this for the month of June, and then when July gets here, I've already kind of counted out in my head, kind of taken this and mapped out just to see that, you know, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3, 4, I would have enough room if I use these squares to represent the 30, 31 days of the month, whatever July is. It would still leave me with maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches of space to write the habit. So I think that's what I'm going to do next month for my July tracker, monthly habit tracker. And then after that, I went into my dailies, and this is my favorite part of the bullet journal. I'm doing them in line with Ryder Carroll's method, in that I'm not setting up a, you know, predetermined amount of space. I'm not drawing a certain size square or dividing my pages. I'm just allowing myself however much space ends up being needed for each day. So this is how Monday and Tuesday turned out. And then Wednesday through Friday ended up fitting on one page. I'm filming this on Saturday, so I'm not yet done here. I feel like this one page is going to end up being more than enough for Saturday and Sunday. So I will then go into setting up my next week here. So let me know in the comments below if y'all enjoy me going into this much detail when I talk about this particular journal, or if this is just unnecessary and way too much information, because I realize this is going to be a longer video. So, you know, if you find yourself fast forwarding through most of this and you don't need this kind of detail, that's perfectly fine. Let me know. And what I would do in that case is just wait and maybe do a monthly flip through at the end of each month and just very quickly show you how it looked. However, if this level of detail is helpful to you, let me know that, because if there's enough of you that say that, I may start doing this every weekend and just giving you a detailed commentary of things that did or didn't work throughout each week and kind of show you how this changes over time. Obviously, I won't have to go through the bulk of the main setup in every video. So even if I did more detailed ones on a weekly basis, I don't think they would be nearly as long as this one. But I just wanted to share with y'all those little details of things that I figured out along the way in case you decide to set up a book of your own. So overall, I'm really happy with this. I love the bee theme for the month, and I'm really liking this Archer and Olive book as well. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate every one of you. If you have any questions, leave them for me in the comments as well, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.